can't find my baby. She was outside playing, and I came out here after cooking dinner a little bit, and I'm looking for her, but I don't see her nowhere. She has on pink Minnie Mouse pajamas, and she had in pink beads. She had braids.
20 minutes. That's how long a mother said she'd lost sight of her 4-year-old when she called 911 on June 30th, 2026. It launched a massive, multi-agency search, helicopters, K-9 units, more than 5,000 acres of South Carolina woodland, covered in the summer heat. 4 days later, Aiken County Sheriff Marty Sawyer stood at a podium. That 20-minute story investigators would later allege was never true. Javeayah Harris had already been gone for at least a month. It is the outcome that we all feared, and sadly, it is now what we face. Aiken County, South Carolina, Tuesday, June 30th, 2026. The kind of summer evening where the heat doesn't lift much after the sun goes down. Just before 9 p.m., a woman calls 911. "I can't find my baby." She gives her address on Hillsborough Street. The dispatcher tells her to breathe, that help is already on the way. She says her daughter had been playing outside, that she'd gone in to check on dinner, and when she came back out, the yard was empty. She describes what Javeayah was last seen wearing: pink Minnie Mouse pajamas, pink beads in her braided hair, Crocs on her feet. Asked how long it had been since she'd last seen her daughter, she gives the detail that will define this case for the next 4 days. "I just came up here like no less than 20 or 30 minutes. I went in the house to cook dinner. 20 or 30 minutes. That's the gap the entire search will be built around." A woman 9 months pregnant, home alone, with a 4-year-old, who says she stepped inside just long enough to start dinner. She tells the dispatcher she and her husband had only just bought the house. She doesn't know the area well yet. "It's not a good area," she says, and mentions people she's seen walking behind the property. Something about it has always unsettled her. She and her husband don't talk to the neighbors, she adds. Most of them, as far as she knows, are into drugs. Asked if there's a pond or creek nearby, anywhere Javeayah could have wandered toward, she says she has no idea. They've only just moved in. Nothing in the yard but a dog and some chickens. She says, no other kids around to have wandered off with. Asked about health issues, she mentions an autism screening with no formal diagnosis, then adds, almost proudly, that Javeayah is smart, that she can carry a full conversation. The last place she checked was the chicken coop, tucked behind the house. That's where Javeayah always turns up when she wanders. Not this time. By the time deputies arrive, Javeayah's father, Johmarea Harris, is home too. He tells investigators he'd been at a laundromat, gone about an hour and a half. The area is placed under surveillance within the hour, because there's no confirmed abduction and no clear evidence of imminent danger. The case doesn't meet the legal criteria for an Amber Alert. A distinction the sheriff's office has to explain publicly within days, as the question of why one wasn't issued keeps coming up. Digital billboards along local roads start carrying Javeayah's photo before the week is out. What does go out immediately is everything else. Helicopters, K-9 units into the tree line behind the house. Drones cutting grids over the woods after dark. Deputies posted at intersections on Pipeline Road and Reynolds Pond Road, stopping cars, asking questions. Investigators gather to pray outside Bethel Baptist Church, which becomes the search's command post, before heading back out into the heat. No one searching those woods on the first night knew what investigators would come to allege just 4 days later. By July 1st, the response had scaled into something enormous. The FBI joined. So did the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, and sheriffs from Edgefield, Lexington, Kershaw, and Richmond County, each sending their own people and resources. By Friday, the ground search covered more than 5,000 acres. On the Thursday of that week, a deputy briefly told reporters the case was being treated as an abduction. Within hours, the sheriff's office walked it back. The deputy had misspoken. There was no evidence of one, and officially, this was still a search for a missing child. FBI Columbia put out its own public statement. The search was leaving no place unchecked, with agencies using every available resource to find this little girl. By that Friday, 4 days in, with no sign of her, the sheriff's office made a different kind of announcement. The visible search, the trucks, the volunteers, the boots on the ground, was being scaled back, while organized search activities will be reduced. Rest assured the search for Javeayah will not stop until we find her, the office said. Something was shifting, even if the public didn't yet know what. Somewhere in the middle of all this, Javeayah's father gave an interview to a local news station. Asked if his daughter was the kind of child who might wander off. He said no, she wasn't like that. She didn't even have a sense of stranger danger. Asked how he was holding up, he said only this: "Not knowing is killing me." On the ground, something stopped fitting. A neighbor identified only as Ms. Young told a local news crew that the story of a wandering child didn't match the girl she knew. "She won't cross the street. She likes to hold people's hands," Ms. Young said. "Even when she walked to the refrigerator, she still wanted to hold your hand." Not, by the account of someone who'd spent real time around her, a child built for disappearing into a tree line alone. Ms. Young said more than that. She and others on the street said they hadn't just seen Javeayah occasionally. They'd been feeding her, bathing her, sending her home in clean clothes. They fed her, bathed her, and gave her new clothes and sent her back home, she said. It wasn't just me. People in that neighborhood noticed the exact same thing. Other neighbors told reporters searching the area that Saturday that they hadn't seen Javeayah in months. Not days, months. A search that size was underway for a girl that some of the people living closest to her hadn't laid eyes on in far longer than the 20 or 30 minutes her mother described to 911. By the following week, FBI Special Agent in charge Kevin Moore would put words to what the search had become. "Whenever a child goes missing, it's a joint effort to find them," he said. Then, once the direction of the case changed entirely, "It's heartbreaking that we are not standing here with better news." What was actually happening inside that house while search teams fanned out through the woods? July 4, 2026. Aiken County Sheriff Marty Sawyer steps up to a podium. 36 years in law enforcement. This is the moment from the opening. The line the audience heard before any of it made sense. "This is the hardest announcement in my 36 years working in law enforcement," Sawyer says. "I am deeply saddened to tell you our investigation and evidence leads us to believe 4-year-old Javeayah Harris is deceased. It is the outcome that we all feared, and sadly, it is now what we face." That much was already devastating. It wasn't the whole of it, because underneath that statement was something more specific, a timeline that reframed everything the search had been built on. Sadly, it was already too late to save her. The moment the 911 call came in on June 30th, Sawyer continues. "At this time, our investigation supports that she has been deceased for at least 1 month. A month. A wandering child would explain 20 minutes. It doesn't explain a month. According to investigators, Javeayah had already been gone for 4 weeks by the time her mother picked up the phone. 4 weeks while no search had begun. 4 weeks while a pregnancy reached its final days. 4 weeks while a street full of neighbors wondered where she'd gone. Then, the arrests. Johmarea Harris, 23. Michilae Herring, 22. Both charged with homicide by child abuse. Under South Carolina law, that charge applies specifically to the death of a child under 11, caused during abuse or neglect. Under circumstances manifesting an extreme indifference to human life, it carries 20 years to life in prison. Herring faces an additional charge, filing a false police report, which can carry up to 5 years or a $5,000 fine. Both are denied bond at separate hearings on July 5th, both without an attorney present. Both told their income is too high to qualify for a public defender, because a magistrate court can't set bond on a homicide charge. The decision moves to circuit court, expected within 30 days. At his hearing, when the judge asked who else lived in his household, Johmarea Harris answered, "My girlfriend," and then, in a softer tone, "My child." 2 days later, investigators released the arrest warrants. According to those documents, both parents confessed. The warrants described the circumstances surrounding Javeayah's death as manifesting extreme indifference to human life. They allege she suffered an injury from physical abuse at the hands of Herring around June 5, and that neither parent sought medical attention for her afterward, June 5 to June 30th. 25 days between an alleged injury and a phone call that made it sound like the whole thing had started that night. The warrants go further than that. Not a failure to act, this time, active concealment. Herring is alleged to have disposed of her daughter's body, then called 911 to report her missing. On the 911 call, Herring described the man at the house as her husband. In court days later, Johmarea Harris referred to her only as his girlfriend. Herring also told the dispatcher she was uneasy about people she'd seen walking a path behind the house. And Harris, speaking to detectives before his own arrest, said much the same thing, that he'd given investigators information about people snooping around the property. Days later, Herring gave birth. The newborn was placed with relatives. The search for Javeayah's remains moved 2 hours north, toward the Fairfield-Chester County line, closer to Union County, where both parents had lived as recently as last year. Divers went into Debutary Creek, which empties toward Rocky Creek Lake, known locally as Stumpy Pond, for the submerged trees that make the water difficult to navigate, let alone search. SLED, the Department of Natural Resources, the Fairfield County Sheriff's Office, boats, a helicopter, all of it now searching water, 2 hours from the chicken coop where a mother once said she'd last seen her daughter playing. Additional charges, authorities say, may still be coming. How long did this go unseen, and by whom? In the days after the announcement, FBI agents and Aiken County investigators went door to door through the neighborhood around Hillsborough Street. Dozens of personnel, including members of the Bureau's Behavioral Analysis Unit and its Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team, knocking, asking questions, following up on months of small interactions nobody had thought to report as anything more than being a good neighbor. Because that's exactly what the canvassing kept turning up. Ms. Young hadn't been describing one isolated act of kindness. The same pattern showed up at more than one house on that street, often enough that she could say with confidence, it wasn't just her. On Sunday, July 5th, hundreds of people gathered at the alley in downtown Aiken for a candlelight vigil, many wearing pink, the color Javeayah was wearing in the photo that had circulated all week. One by one, people stepped forward to speak. She was a beautiful baby, said Lisa Avendano, a neighbor. I'd think of it if it was my little girl. Another woman put it more plainly, to the crowd rather than to a camera, that it takes a village to keep a child safe, that everyday people need to speak up when they see abuse, and that a child's circumstances beforehand don't change whether she deserved better. It was very sad. Heartbreaking, is how another attendee, Teresa Hamilton, put it. A plainer register than anyone at that vigil needed to dress up. Had anyone ever made a formal report to Child Protective Services? If one was filed, the public record doesn't show it, and that gap is its own kind of unresolved question. If an entire street was showing up for this one child on a regular basis, did any agency know? Here's what the record does show. If investigators are right that Javeayah had already been dead for a month before that 911 call, then the neighbors who said they hadn't seen her in weeks, in months, were telling the truth in a way nobody understood at the time. Her absence was the evidence. No one raised the alarm sooner because the two people who normally would have were, according to prosecutors, the same two people responsible for her death. A new family on a quiet street, neighbors who didn't know them well yet, and a 4-year-old who, by every account, had simply stopped coming outside to play. That gap, what the street saw and what the system did with it, is one this case still hasn't closed. That gap isn't unique to one street in Aiken County. In July 2008, a grandmother in Orlando, Florida, called 911 to say she hadn't seen her granddaughter in 31 days, and that her daughter's car smelled like there'd been a body inside it. Casey Anthony had spent that month telling family that 2-year-old Kaylee was staying with a babysitter who never existed. Kaylee's remains were found 5 months later, in the woods near her family's home. In 2011, a jury acquitted Casey Anthony of murder and convicted her only of lying to police, a verdict people still argue about today. Nothing about how that case ended predicts how this one will. Johmarea Harris and Michilae Herring haven't stood trial. Nobody has decided anything yet. What the Anthony case left behind wasn't just a controversial verdict. It was a law. Lawmakers in at least 35 states proposed some version of what became known as Kaylee's Law, and 10 passed it. making it a crime for a parent to delay reporting a missing child. South Carolina isn't one of them. Its own child protection statutes don't include that specific requirement. The idea behind the law elsewhere was simple. By the time anyone outside the house finds out a child is gone, the window that mattered most has usually already closed. That's not a coincidence specific to Florida in 2008. Look at national data on child deaths from abuse and neglect going back 20 years. And the pattern holds. Children 5 and younger account for roughly 4 out of every 5 of those deaths. Not older kids, not teenagers. The very young, killed almost always inside their own home, by someone already trusted to be there. None of that tells us what happened to Javeayah Harris. A national pattern doesn't decide one family's case. What it does explain is why the 20-minute story in Chapter 1 had such a familiar shape, even before anyone knew it was false, and why Ms. Young trusted her own eyes over it. A plausible accident, a missing child, a story built to survive one round of questions. Sometimes, it doesn't survive a second round. The pattern explains why cases like this keep happening. It doesn't explain what happened to Javeayah Harris. Only the specific facts can, and those are still being gathered, right now, in the woods behind a house on Hillsborough Street, and in the water 2 hours north of it. As of this recording, the search for Javeayah Harris is at a strange kind of pause. Divers have worked Debutary Creek. Boats have moved across Stumpy Pond. Investigators extended the search into Union County, where both parents previously lived, and a second candlelight vigil has now been held there too. Then, this Tuesday night, the search came back to where it started. Investigators returned to the house on Hillsborough Street, taped off the property, and spent hours digging through the woods beside the home. The same woods a mother once told a dispatcher she'd already checked herself. This time, they brought the Aiken County Coroner's Office with them. "We are accompanying the Sheriff's Office at this time," the Chief Deputy Coroner said. They stayed roughly 4 hours. By the next morning, the equipment was gone. No patrol cars, no command post, no helicopter. Outside, the memorial at the mailbox kept growing. Close to 100 people came to stand and watch that Tuesday night. The way people had been showing up at that house for over a week. Remains still have not been recovered. No cause of death has been formally determined. It can't be, without a body, and without a trial. As of this writing, Sheriff Sawyer has another public update scheduled for this Thursday morning. Both Johmarea Harris and Michilae Herring remain at the Aiken County Detention Center, held without bond. Herring's first court appearance is scheduled for September 18th, Harris's September 19th, both at 9 a.m. What those confessions actually say, how much responsibility each parent is alleged to bear. Whether prosecutors will treat Johmarea Harris and Michilae Herring the same way in court, or draw a distinction between them, hasn't been made public. Neither has motive. Nothing released so far explains why. What the record does show is a 4-year-old girl who, according to prosecutors, died from injuries inflicted by the 2 people responsible for keeping her safe, and whose death went unreported for a month while a household continued on and a pregnancy reached its end. It also shows a street full of people who noticed something wrong, who fed her, clothed her, and held her hand across a kitchen, and who still couldn't reach her in time, because whatever was happening to her was happening behind a door none of them could see through. Those who knew her remembered her as smart, a girl who, in her mother's words, could carry a full conversation. Her father remembered her as friendly, respectful, the kind of kid who said yes, ma'am, and no, sir, without being asked twice. She didn't like to cross a room without holding someone's hand, not even to reach the refrigerator. She wore pink beads in her braided hair. She was 4 years old. When this case reaches its next stage, we will be back. Because Javeayah's story isn't finished, and neither is ours. This case isn't over. Right now, on both ends of that 2-hour drive, people are still working to find out exactly what happened to Javeayah Harris. If her story stays with you, and it should, the most valuable thing you can do is share it, because cases like this don't stay visible on their own. They fade, unless someone keeps saying the name.